What is a holdover tenant in rental properties? Imagine you have a tenant whose lease has just expired, but they are still living in the property. What happens next? This situation is more common than you might think and can create some tricky questions for landlords. Let's break down what a holdover tenant really is and how it impacts lease renewals and property management. A holdover tenant is someone who stays in a rental property after their lease has ended without signing a new agreement or getting explicit permission from the landlord. This means they are occupying the space beyond the original lease period. Sometimes, the tenant continues paying rent, which can lead to a new type of tenancy called a month-to-month lease, depending on local laws. Other times, if the landlord refuses rent payments, the tenant might be considered trespassing, and the landlord will need to start eviction procedures. The key factor here is whether the landlord accepts rent after the lease expires. If they do, it often means the landlord agrees to a new tenancy, which could be on a month-to-month basis or a renewed lease. But if the landlord does not accept rent and the tenant stays, the landlord has the right to pursue eviction for unlawful detainer. To prevent confusion, lease agreements should clearly state what happens at the end of the lease. For example, some contracts automatically convert to a month-to-month agreement unless the tenant moves out or signs a new lease. Managing holdover tenants can be challenging. It can delay preparing the property for new tenants, cause financial losses, or lead to legal issues. That's why it's important for landlords to communicate clearly and start lease renewal discussions well before the current lease ends. Including specific clauses about what happens when the lease expires helps avoid surprises. For instance, some landlords specify that, if no new lease is signed, the tenant must vacate the property. If a tenant does holdover, landlords have options. They can negotiate a new lease, convert the tenancy to a periodic lease, or pursue eviction if the tenant refuses to leave. Staying proactive with lease renewals and having clear policies in place helps keep things running smoothly. Always remember, following local laws and legal procedures is essential when dealing with holdover tenants to protect your rights and avoid unintended lease agreements.